Okay, now separation, basically the criteria is that it must be communicated to the other party. So I think the criteria is that the parties agree that the marriage is irretrievably broken down. So at some point one party communicates to the other party that they are separated. They may still be living together. There's no requirement that you move out of the house. A lot of parties remain in the house after the date of separation. But generally it's got to be communicated to the other party. Sometimes I've got here, it suggested that you note down the date of separation. Sometimes there can be an issue about the date of separation. Prior to or around the 1st of March last year, there was a lot of cases where people were arguing that they were separated either prior to the 1st of March or after the 1st of March, because people were trying to come under the amendments for de facto relationships. So I suppose in other words, to explain that a bit further, if you were somebody who it was in your interest that you wanted to be caught under the family law amendments because perhaps you had you were a low income earner and you wanted an adjustment in your favour, or you had the care of children, then you would argue that separation was after the 1st of March, and then if you didn't want those amendments, you'd argue before. So that was a bit of a period where separation was a bit of a contest. In my experience, people aren't overly concerned once they've resolved their matters as to whether they can get that 12-month period of divorce. But sometimes it can be an issue, and particularly if you're still living together, it's probably important that you make a note of what that date of separation is. So separation period must be 1 year and 1 month before divorce can be granted. Parties should attend counselling sessions to see if the breakdown can be resolved. That's probably more of you don't have to go to counselling sessions, that's just something that I would recommend, and I think it's just definitely in the party's interest. And then, so then we've got that's the initial, then you've got the initial phase of separation. Okay, these are some of the questions that usually plague the minds of the parties when they're separated. The first one is who pays the mortgage, or who repays the mortgage. A lot of husbands move out of the family home and they may be paying the mortgage to start off with, and they think, well, why am I still paying the mortgage? I'm no longer living in the home. I'm now paying rent, and I'm feeling a bit, hard done by here. And one of the questions they always ask is, can I stop paying the mortgage, or can I just start paying half, and then make my wife responsible for the other half, even though she's not working and maybe she's raising children. So in that sort of a case, you would always say, well, look, it's probably not advisable you do that, because your wife would then make an application for spousal maintenance because she has, an expense that she needs to pay. You were looking after her before in this marriage. You cannot change that arrangement now. So in general, if both parties are working, you would come to some arrangement whereby if one party leaves the home, they pay a lesser rate because they're also paying rent, and obviously the person who's staying in the home is not paying rent, so they have a bit more disposable income. But otherwise, if the husband leaves the home and he was paying the mortgage before, then he tends to keep paying the mortgage, and then I suppose that puts even a greater emphasis on resolving the matter sooner rather than later, because the longer it drags out, then the more expensive it becomes for both parties, because when you split the household, suddenly people are paying a lot more money than they were before because they were combining everything. Another question is, can I be forced to leave the home? A lot of people, when one person wants to separate, there's always a bit of confusion about who leaves the home. Some people say that I have heard a lot of lawyers advise people to try and stay in the home, because if you're in the home you have that, I suppose you have greater support because you're in the primary asset and you're not paying rent. And therefore when things get a bit tight later on, you're in a better financial position. Look, it's not always possible. It depends a lot on the relationship between the parties. While I have seen some people try and stay in the marital home after separation, and they make it work. I've seen other situations where they just become so emotionally, tired and just they fight all the time, and the emotional effect can outweigh any financial savings. But you can.
If the husband left the home,
Yes.
can he come back?
Generally not. Once you move out and you're out for a period of time, you cannot turn around and just march back in, because even though you still own that asset, the family court does deem that you've actually now separated. The parties have got on with their life to some extent. There's all privacy issues. If you just go and march back in, people have, you're not living there anymore. So it's not impossible. I mean, if you are financially strained and you really do need to move back in, you could probably make an application to do so. But in general, the moment you move out the door, you usually find the locks get changed, and it's not a simple process to move back in. And you cannot be forced to leave the home. You own that home with your partner, even if you don't own it, if you're not on the legal title, because you've been living there for 22 years or however long, the court deems that you actually own that property. So no one can go kicking you out of your home. But once you leave, it's not that easy to come back. Can I be restricted from seeing my children? Well, look, generally, the way children, the whole focus with children is always the best interest of the child. It's not the best interest of the parents. So children obviously want to have a relationship with both their parents. If you're in a situation where you've been restricted from seeing your child, then obviously you go and see a lawyer and you make an application just to, for parenting orders. And subject to there being any suggestion that you're violent or abusive or a danger to your children, then the court will definitely encourage you to see your children, because it's definitely in their interest to have a relationship with both their parents.